Well, hello and welcome to this special live episode of the Energy Detox, coming to you today, one day after St. Patrick's Day and one day after World Shale Energy Day. And our goals today are twofold. One, to draw this year's sweepstakes winner, the grand prize winner of the World Shale Energy Day / St. Patrick's Day sweepstakes. We'll do that here in just a moment. And after that, we'll also segue to a brief conversation about leadership, as we always do here on the Energy Detox, with a special focus on, of course, shale and St. Patrick. And in particular, we'll tie in bagpipes, because when you think about St. Patrick's Day, or if you happen to be at a St. Patrick's Day parade, as I was a couple days ago, you very likely encountered some bagpipes. But you also likely encountered the same songs that you expect to hear anytime bagpiper shows up anywhere in your vicinity. And so we'll talk about the importance of not being as predictable as the playlist of a bagpiper, but instead being a differentiated leader, and a leader who is maybe, if not a little unpredictable, at least doesn't draw from the same short playlist that every other leader out there is doing. But without further ado, we are going to draw our 2025 World Shale Energy Day sweepstakes winner. And all of the people who entered the contest before this morning's cutoff have been entered in this here leprechaun hat. So all the entries are in there on some magical coins. I'm going to give them a stir here with this shillelagh, and we will draw that one grand prize winner who will be announced live here on air. Of course, we'll do this blindly here. I have one coin in my hand. I will set that aside, and I will read our winner, who is Tim Carr of Huntsville, Washington. So if you can see that there in focus, Tim Carr, you are this year's winner. I will be contacting you for shipping information since you are on the other side of the country there. But again, this contest is open to anybody around the world, because of course on World Shale Energy Day, we celebrate and acknowledge the impact that the unleashing of energy from beneath our feet here in the shale reserves, especially the reserves that we have here in Western Pennsylvania in the form of the Marcellus and Utica, the transformation that has really allowed the world to have over the last 2 decades. And as a quick reminder for anybody who isn't familiar with this contest and happens to be tuning into this live episode of the Energy Detox primarily for the leadership lessons, as a quick reminder, Tim will be receiving 4 of these Guinness pint glasses engraved with World Shale Energy Day. These were shipped straight from Ireland here and arrived a couple days ago. Tim will also be receiving 4 of these Guinness coasters that are etched with Happy World Shale Energy Day. And again, the date of that occasion, March 17th. He'll also be receiving this stone bottle opener, which doesn't just remind us of the shale that's under our feet. It is not made of shale, but it does remind us of the fact that, well, much like a bottle opener can unleash the potential of a bottle of whatever your beverage of choice happens to be, well, the advent of fracking and horizontal well drilling has unleashed the potential of the shale that's been under our feet for millions of years. 2 other things that Tim will be receiving are these green World Shale Energy Day socks that I'm sure he is anxious to wear here throughout the next 364 days in anticipation of next St. Patrick's Day / World Shale Energy Day. And this book here, this biography of George Mitchell, who is often known as the father of fracking. And with George Mitchell segueing into the leadership piece, one reason that we give away each year a copy of that book is because George Mitchell was a complex man. He did not take an overly simplified view of leadership, not an overly simplified view of the world, not an overly simplified view of the energy industry. He was, again, by all accounts, fairly complex. His view of sustainability, his view of making the world a better planet for what is now 8 billion inhabitants. Well, again, it's a stark contrast to what some people might want to characterize as just some stereotypical billionaire oilman. George Mitchell was not stereotypical, which brings us to today's topic. That is, how can you not be seen as a stereotypical leader? How can you not be seen as somebody who just picks up a leadership book on occasion or has amassed a couple tools and tips and tricks that are your go-to, that served you well throughout your career, but that by and large are fairly predictable from your audience? How do you get to the point where people look at you for inspiration, for something different, for something that's not merely the status quo when it comes to leadership? And put in terms that, again, would be familiar with anybody here celebrating the week of St. Patrick's Day, if you will, if you're still celebrating. Well, how do you avoid being seen like that bagpiper who shows up, and what do you expect? Well, you expect probably one of two songs, right? Not to stereotype bagpipers, but when I see a bagpipe, I think of either Amazing Grace or the song that greeted those of you who joined us from the beginning, Scotland the Brave. So, which came to me while watching the St. Patrick's Day parade in Pittsburgh and sitting with my sons, waiting for my wife and daughter to march on by with the Irish dance crew that my daughter's a part of. And quite frankly, I felt like this great predictor of the future sitting with my sons and saying, hey, look, I'm going to bet a lot of money that the song they're going to play is that, well, Scotland the Brave. I hummed it for them. They would play that song. And again, I don't know that my sons actually looked at me with awe, but again, it wasn't exactly going on a limb to predict that that song was going to be played. So again, bringing it back to you, how predictable are you? Do people look to you when you're faced with some decision or some difficult scenario? Can they basically predict what you're going to do, what you're going to say, how you're going to react? Or do you at least convey the sense that you're looking at each situation consciously? Because that's the whole point of the energy detox. That's the whole point of winning partners, is to fuel conscious leaders, winning leaders, leaders who don't just go through the motions, don't just rely on 2 or 3 songs, if you will, a limited playlist, if you will, a limited toolbox, but instead approach things with the widest toolbox available so that in the moment, when you need to leverage a song, if you will, or a tool, or a saying, or an approach that, again, might be uncommon, that you're able to do so. And so the simple challenge for you today is, what are some of the things that are coming across as stale? How can you liven them up? What are all the ways to convey your message, to motivate your team, your colleagues, your customers in a way that maybe they don't expect? What would you love to try today? You know, it's easy to talk about challenging the status quo and thinking outside of the box. But to actually do that and say, hey, I did a specific thing today that challenged the status quo, that's easier said than done. And in my coaching of individuals, very often I challenge them to literally come up with some potential new way of approaching their communication with their employees, some new way of dealing with a problem employee, some new way of balancing the 400 things on their to-do list when they only have time for 3 or 4. It's easy to go to the well, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but for the sake of your team, for the sake of people that are looking at you, again, do you at least ask that question of, what are all the ways to tackle this problem and not come across as a bagpiper with a mere 2 or 3 songs in your repertoire? So, as you ponder that question, as always, I thank you for tuning in to the Energy Detox, this live episode of the Energy Detox. I thank everybody who entered this year's World Shale Energy Day sweepstakes. I congratulate, of course, Tim Carr of Huntsville, Washington, our winner of this year's sweepstakes, on the heels of last year's winner, who's from Colorado, John Roberts. So again, congrats to you gentlemen for winning the last 2 years. And I encourage anybody who didn't enter who entered and did not win to be on the lookout in early March of 2026 for the next rendition of this annual sweepstakes. So with that, as always, I wish you the very best. I hope that this day 2 of World Shale Energy Day, or St. Patrick's Day week, if you will, treats you well. And with that, thank you again for tuning in. Take care.